Okay, so
you have a list of questions, it looks like. But it's probably good you're recording, so you don't have to write furiously, right?
Yeah. So let me start of order. So what do you do as a counselor?
Here at DMAC?
Yeah.
So primarily, I'd say the majority of my job is providing like mental health counseling to students. So the nice thing about counseling here at DMAC is that it's free. Students don't have to use health insurance or pay out of pocket. It comes along with their fees that they pay for school. So it's mental health counseling or related to students' mental health. So sometimes it's a little bit more like academic stress or, career indecision, those kinds of stresses and whatnot. But sometimes it's just, mental health issues that a student has had for a period of time or that have come up during their college experience. So, yeah. And then the other piece, I do teach the college experience class, teach 4 sections of that every semester with new students to the college.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, out of your experience, have you seen an increase in loneliness in students?
Yes, I would say since the pandemic, there has been an increase in students reaching out for services. So, is that specifically an increase in loneliness? I think some of it might be. Definitely during the pandemic, we had students say, identifying that as an issue. And I think since the pandemic, services, reaching out for services has increased. I don't necessarily have maybe quite as many students identifying loneliness in particular. I just think also that services, the need for services and students reaching out is increasing. It's just across the board. I think due to lots of things, I guess, but yeah, definitely after the pandemic saw a lot more students.
Yeah. So how often do you talk to students who are experiencing loneliness or how often?
How often? No, finish your question. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
How often do you talk to students who experience loneliness and feeling depressed?
Yeah. Well, depression, I would say, I probably see, as far as, the number of students I see every week is probably about 10 to maybe 12, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. Of those students, I think depression is a very common thing they're experiencing, probably at least 80%, maybe not, maybe 70 to 80% for sure, I would say, of the students are experiencing some level of depression. Of those students, those that actually identify loneliness in particular, probably maybe, half of those, I would say, identify it out loud or outright. But I think with depression, of course, that can always be related, and the majority of students that I see are experiencing some level of depression. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah. So, when did you think it started increasing? You said the pandemic. Really.
Yeah, during the pandemic, during when there was quarantine and a lot of isolation going on, there were a lot more students that were identifying that specifically. Being lonely and the connection, that kind of thing. That increased for sure. So, maybe around 2021, 2020. Yeah. and then just an increase in students overall since that time.
Yeah. So, what do you think are kind of the most important causes of loneliness?
Yeah, that's a good question. The most important causes, I think, just disconnection. There's a rise and an increase in offering and popularity of online classes, which is a great option. Lots of students really like online classes. It can be really convenient, but consequently, then students aren't connecting with each other in the same way that they would in the classroom, and their instructor maybe sometimes in the same way. So I think that, students end up being pretty isolated. If they're taking all online classes, they're not necessarily connecting and meeting and interacting with other students their same age. So that's probably some of it. I think that was your question. I don't know. Did I go off on a tangent or did I answer that?
No, I think that you answered.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like, how can you separate clinical loneliness from just feeling lonely in general?
Mm-hmm. That I would say, clinical loneliness. In fact, I'm not exactly sure. I could be wrong. I'm not sure if that's like necessarily a clinical term, maybe a symptom. So clinical loneliness, I would probably categorize more as like clinical depression. So, and if I'm looking at clinical depression, that is more on a scale of how chronic it is, how long it lasts, and how much it affects your ability to function in your daily life. So the clinical part gets to the point where students, for a period of 2 weeks or more often than not are experiencing those symptoms of depression, not isolation, which is part of loneliness sometimes too. But sometimes when it goes into depression, students are isolating themselves as a symptom of depression, pulling away from other people. So that can be kind of the difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I can, feeling lonely or kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
Just because somebody's lonely doesn't necessarily mean they're depressed. So I'm not trying to say they're the same thing, but like loneliness and isolation can be a symptom of depression or even major depression or maybe, moderate depression too. Whereas just feeling lonely could be something that maybe a student isn't necessarily experiencing depression or even a mental health issue at all, but they're feeling lonely because of some of those factors, like they're only taking online classes, they've moved away from home for the first time, and, haven't made connections with new friends and things. So a couple different things.
Yeah. What goes on in students lives that that contributes to them experiencing loneliness? Because you've already said kind of moving away from home, but maybe more in terms of like family stuff or emotional things.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say a couple of those things I already mentioned. Not having online classes and not going face to face, and maybe moving away from home and away from their family support and friend support network. Those contribute a lot. Maybe just if we're talking about maybe mental health, just feeling like they don't fit in sometimes can really contribute to loneliness, which also has to do with maybe moving away from home. But I've had students who live in the apartments with 3 other people, but they're still saying they feel lonely. Like, they just maybe haven't clicked with those other roommates, or their interests are different, or they don't get along, or they, don't like that chaos, so they tend to isolate themselves in their room or stay away from the apartment, and haven't maybe gotten involved with activities on campus and things where they're meeting some new people. So yeah, or just underlying mental health issues, right? If someone is experiencing those for the first time, chronic or for the first time, they're not feeling like going out and making those connections. That seems overwhelming or, yeah, scary maybe. So.
Yeah. So, um, how does it vary? How does loneliness vary from one student to another in terms of, emotional feelings of loneliness?
Yeah, I guess I kind of answered that already. I guess just to kind of reiterate, but um, a student who maybe isn't, like I said, it maybe isn't experiencing a specific mental health issue such as depression or anxiety or, just even an adjustment disorder or something, is feeling lonely because of the circumstances of, like we said, moving away for the first time, haven't met new people, whatever. They're feeling lonely because they're used to a lot of interaction, used to having family around all the time, used to having close friends around all the time, used to be going to activities at their school and extracurricular activities and just being very busy and on the go and around people all the time. So they're feeling very lonely because of the circumstance, whereas someone who's depressed is feeling lonely maybe as a symptom of their depression and isolation. So that would be kind of the difference and the variance between students.
Yeah. So, and because this is a, community college, do you think that there's more prevalence of loneliness here as opposed to a four-year college where the students are, on campus,
Yeah.
living in, dorms, knowing each other, having closer
Yeah.
relationships?
I do think it's more difficult for students here at a community college or like a commuter college where people don't live on campus. Definitely harder for them to meet people, and they have to be much more purposeful about it, as opposed to maybe a four-year college where there's dorms and campus living where you're just interacting with people all the time because you live with them 24 hours a day. As far as loneliness, I still think, I don't know, my opinion would be I think it's probably equally prevalent at both, honestly, just, maybe more um, less circumstance of, just that kind of lack of interaction with people at a four-year college because that's kind of forced on you. But if someone's feeling depressed, they can feel lonely in a room full of people, so.
Yeah. So then, another question, like, how do you think, social media has played a role in loneliness? Like, you
Sure.
talk to people who have.
Yeah, I suppose some of it has to do with just the electronic communication, whether it's texts or snaps or whatever. So as opposed to maybe a phone call or a face-to-face visit, people are doing more electronic communication. So that takes away that kind of personal interaction and maybe human touch or human just presence. So I think that can contribute definitely. I know that with depression, that one of the things I recommend for students if they're struggling with depression or that sometimes taking a break from social media is really important. Deleting those apps off their phone and just not constantly being engaged because, that saying that comparison is the thief of joy, right? When we start comparing ourselves to other people, which is very often what people do on social media, right? You see what everybody else is doing that looks so fun all the time and you're not, or your friends are out and you weren't invited. That is, the thief of our joy. So that means that we start to feel bad about ourselves because we're comparing ourselves or comparing our experience to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. And how does it affect, how does feelings of loneliness affect, students' self-esteem, feelings
Sure.
of themselves?
Sure. I would say again that self-esteem piece might be not directly related necessarily to loneliness, because again, someone can be very outgoing and just by circumstance they're feeling lonely, so not directly correlated, but I think when it starts going into feelings of depression, homesickness, other mental health issues, that self-esteem can really be affected, right? Because sometimes we start feeling lonely, isolating ourselves, the depression, and then comparing ourselves to other people, and then kind of starting to internalize that to feel like, well, there must be something wrong with me, because again, it looks like everybody else is out there having fun, they're not inviting me, there must be something wrong with me. So, yeah.
And so, just how do students present themselves when they feel lonely? What are kind of personality traits or kind of ways of being defined?
That's, I don't know that there is one particular way that students present themselves. Again, if they're feeling signs of depression, I can usually tell in kind of their affect. So even just how they're presenting themselves, maybe not smiling a lot, they could be very tearful at times, sometimes just very withdrawn and quiet. Just not reaching out. Those are probably some of the biggest signs and ways I can tell.
So, how do students, kind of experiences shape their loneliness?
Yeah.
So just...
Sure. That phenomenon, I think, of young adults, if we're talking about, kind of traditional age college students, here at DMAC we have, well, probably all colleges, but especially here at DMAC, our community college, we have students of all ages. So some are well into adulthood with families coming back to school, but I would say if we're looking at kind of like the traditional college age student, so maybe just finishing up high school and coming to college, that a lot of those life transitions, the differentiation process from parents, right? Like, I'm an adult now, but I still live at home when you're attending community college. So I don't necessarily feel like an adult because I'm still living at home, and it still feels like my parents are making all of the rules. But sometimes students start to kind of push against that or feel depressed because they're in that circumstance and feeling like they should be, maybe moving out like some of their friends are or something. And then also sometimes that just phenomenon of leaving that kind of safe environment of home. Some students feel kind of the opposite, right? Like they are away from home and maybe facing adulthood, but that's very overwhelming and scary. And they're maybe not comfortable taking those risks or putting themselves out there, meeting new people, and then can become lonely that way.
Yeah, because it's kind of a big stretch.
It is. Yeah. It's a big transition. Young adulthood is a big transition. So.
So then, you have a lot of students who feel lonely. Have they been bullied or mistreated? And then, how has that contributed to their feelings of loneliness?
Yeah. Some are, definitely. Some students identify that, like, I'm trying to meet people, or my roommates, I don't fit in with them. They're all friends and they go do things and I don't. So, as far as bullying, I don't know. I don't have students talk about maybe that typical bullying that they're experiencing so much in college. Some, but if you're kind of thinking of the typical bullying where it's teasing and name calling and threatening and that kind of thing, I don't hear that as much. I do hear more of the don't fit in like being excluded at times.
Yeah.
And some students do identify that. Not all, but some students do identify, I've tried to go to this group or this activity and try to introduce myself or meet people, but it just doesn't seem like people really want me to join their group, or I can't break into this group that's already formed, and I'm kind of always feeling like I'm left out.
Mm. Yeah. So then, I kind of already asked this question in a way of how is it connected to depression and anxiety, kind of.
How was it? Yeah. Yep. I think we talked about that, but yeah, definitely connected. It could start with like some of that loneliness and that transition, and then that could progress to very often does progress to depression and anxiety for students. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, what do students tend to, like, what are coping mechanisms that they tend to do when they feel lonely and just isolated in this kind of feeling?
Yeah. Yep. So when there's the mental health and the depression and the anxiety, or maybe the fear of reaching out to people, or depression, which is the isolation, can involve isolation and just not feeling like doing that, getting out of bed even, and those types of things, that can be really hard. But to do just that is to reach out to other people. So, we really recommend, well, and there's a couple of groups on campus that were started last semester. One of them is about loneliness, meets over the lunch hour. There's one on Tuesday and one on Wednesday, kind of over the lunch hour in Building 5, that can bring people together for that reason. But I encourage folks to do something like join a club, and sometimes it's an activity, a group activity or a group meeting club, and to try to meet people that they have something in common with. So that's a nice way to do it, right? If you're really into gaming, there's a game club, and they meet in Building 5 and the Student Activities Center and get together and even just game, because that is an easy way to join and meet someone. You have a like interest, or if you love to work out, try a group activity class. Instead of just going by yourself to go work out, try a spinning class or a yoga class, or something different, a swimming. I don't know if they have swimming classes, they might. But to try something like that, that's a little less threatening. You're going to an activity with a specific purpose, with people who also enjoy that activity. So that's a way to strike up a conversation and meet someone. So that's what I would encourage them to do. It can seem overwhelming, it can seem strange, but that's a really good way to start. Or even in your classes, to join a club or a group that, if you're in a criminal justice program, the criminal justice program has a really active club, human services club, environmental science club. I mean, there's lots of different business type clubs and things. There's lots of those, and that's another really good way, because you may be going with a group or a friend that's in class, or somebody that you at least know, and then you're meeting other people and they have similar interests.
Yeah, that's good. That's helpful. And then, is there anything else that you would recommend, because for students to do if they're feeling lonely?
To try access counseling if they need to, right?
Yeah.
There's free counseling on all DMAC campuses, or for students that are maybe out of range or prefer, you can see a therapist or counselor via Zoom. So that I would definitely recommend talking to a counselor about your feelings, right? Just the fact that you're connecting with even a counselor, that's somebody supportive and helpful, that can also try and help problem solve about ways to cope with those feelings of loneliness, or cope with those feelings of maybe even homesickness or whatever it is when you're moving away from home, or feeling disconnected from friends.
so then, how can, students help themselves with this, and what other kind of resources are available?
Yeah.
For them?
Sure. There's, on our DMAC website, under the counseling page, there's several wellness apps on there, mental health apps and wellness apps that you can access on, a mobile device of some sort, or even a computer if you need to. But there's lots of really good ones on there about coping with anxiety, coping with depression, mindfulness, meditation apps, relaxation. All of those things can be really helpful with our mental health, and developing some coping strategies to deal with that. Negative self-talk, that's a big one. When someone starts to feel lonely and excluded, they start to tell themselves, I'm not worthy. Why would anybody want to hang out with me? There must be something wrong with me. That's negative self-talk, and that can be really damaging to our self-esteem and contribute to depression and loneliness. So that would be a really good thing to seek out via like an app or a mental health resource, online mental health resource, to how to stop that negative self-talk.
So I think that's all the questions I have.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Hopefully you got what you need.
Yeah.
Are you working on this in a group project, or is this individual?
This is just individual.
Okay.